Yeah, we'll add the intro music post processing. Okay, so let's do a quick sound check here. So we'll play it back. So let's see, testing 1, 2, testing. Oh, that's nice. I love it. Let's see.
You're like very white here.
Very white. This is my favorite. Just hearing the voice. It's so clear. It's crystal. Okay, so let's do a testing 1, 2, testing 1, 2,
Testing 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
Perfect.
4, 5.
Okay. Okay. Came through loud and clear. How are you doing?
That's good. Is that a looper? Does that just capture everything, or do you have another piece of hardware?
No, this is just, I stopped the recording and I just played it back.
Is that like its own
This is a mixer. It's
fully
a portable.
encompassed
Yeah.
mixer recorder?
Yes, sir.
That's kind of cool.
I know. It's
I like it.
I saw it on some mobile podcasting blog post things.
You're like Instabuy.
Exactly. I used to have a computer and then a Focusrite 2i2. Shout out Chris Durr. That was his setup that he taught me. But this is easier. You don't need a computer. Anyway, okay. Are we? Yeah, I think we're ready. Yeah, if I remember just writing here, it's not because I'm not paying attention. It's because I'm thinking of something else. Then.
Yeah, do it.
Okay, do it.
Let's have fun.
Yeah.
Let's make it happen.
Okay, let's do it. We're on 3, 2, 1. Hello, everyone. I'm here with Greg Raiz, former CEO of Raiz Labs. He's been in technology damn near all his life. He was a cog. I hope I'm not overstepping my bounds. A cog at Microsoft, and he said, "You know what? I'm not able to steer this ship. It's too big. I'm too small here. I'm going to go start my own thing." So he started Raiz Labs before the iPhone even came out. iPhone comes out. Raiz Labs is one of the first agencies to start taking advantage of that, building iPhone apps, and recently acquired by a company called RightPoint. Congratulations on that. That's a huge accomplishment. And Greg, I remember my internship. I wanted to intern at Raiz Labs, and you were one of the people that interviewed me. And I remember in our conversation, we were just talking about kind of riffing, almost just like what we're about to do, but talking about how the mobile device, the phone, this is the device that's always on you. It knows everything. It's got all these sensors, got all these things. So much more powerful than a PC. And here we are several years later. It's I think bigger than we ever thought. And you certainly took advantage of it. But Greg I think there's a lot of noise in tech. I think there's a lot of people that kind of say things, a lot of echo chamber stuff. Greg and I over the years have riffed on certain things, and he's always had a nuanced view on tech. He's very thoughtful about this stuff. So Greg, thank you so much for coming on. It's not even the end of the workday. We appreciate you booking time during the workday.
We're
here.
rocking and rolling. I love it. I love it, Richard.
How you doing?
I'm doing well. No, it's exciting. I think you said it well. Like we, and I think you were definitely part of this journey. I mean, we started building apps really early on in the early days of the App Store, trying to figure out what this mobile platform would be. And it's just been exciting to see evolve. And now certainly more than ever, people are thinking of their mobile devices as their first devices, their primary points of interaction. We're seeing lots of exciting brands, companies, and new scenarios being built on these devices that would never have dreamed. Kind of when Steve Jobs stood on stage and kind of unveiled the iPhone, I was like, that looks pretty cool. I should get one, but they're way too expensive. And now I'm like, I mean, it's been crazy what's happened over the last decade. Right,
and we were just riffing. You were in the Oakland office, and you were sharing with me that building apps, which I think, so the iPhone came out. I think a lot of people forget this. The iPhone came out, right, and then the App Store came out. I think a year later, something like that.
Yeah, so around 2008, if I remember correctly, the iPhone was unveiled, and it was super expensive. I mean, I didn't have one for a long time. I was not one of the first people in line to get one. I was kind of from the sideline. Ooh, I wish I could afford one of those because they look pretty cool. Right. And then around a year later, they announced both the App Store would be coming, and then I think the App Store and the new iPhone was released close to the similar time for, I think, the iPhone 3GS or 3G. I think it was the iPhone 3G at the time. Right on.
Before we get a little too in the weeds, can you just give a little? We were talking about kind of personal narrative before we hit the old record button on the camera here. Can you talk a little about what is your personal narrative? Where did you kind of give people an idea of where you came from, how you ended up here, your time at Microsoft? Hit us.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of highlight personal narratives, everyone has a story,
Right.
whether they have it intentionally thought about it or it's just kind of happening to them. Life is a series of events and transactions and jobs and functions and things that we all do.
Right.
And I kind of think about how can you tie those things together to make sense of it. Sometimes it doesn't even seem to make sense to you, and only in hindsight does it make sense. But for me, it's always been, I've been passionate about how do you build interesting, exciting technology. I went to school for computer science, but I always had kind of an itch to do design as well. And so that's my personal narrative, is that combination of design and technology. When I was in school, people would say, what are you going to go to school for? What's the college thing going to be? And I really enjoyed the design aspects because there's visual and art and kind of aesthetics.
Right.
And then there's the technology, logical side of my brain, which was like, how do these things fit together? And I've always been admirer of things like Leonardo da Vinci and kind of the fusion of art and technology, Steve
Right.
Jobs and stuff
gonna
like
say.
that. So that's my personal narrative, is how do you connect those two things? And that's taken me through my work at Microsoft. It's taken me through starting my own business, the recent acquisition, and some of the work I'm doing now in terms of heading up innovation for RightPoint.
Right on. Can you talk a little bit more about where you were when you decided, or how you decided to make the decision? How you decided to make the decision? I like that.
I thought really hard about it.
Yeah. To actually start your own business, because I'm 25. I think a lot of people my age are thinking at this point they've been working a few years, and they're thinking, okay, well, I'm kind of interested in doing my own thing. Maybe, more people say it than actually do it, obviously. So how did you ultimately make the decision to, okay, I'm going to leave my my stable job and go try something on my own?
So, and I think this does go back to personal narrative. I think
Right.
you can certainly tell a story of like, oh, there was this day and I made this decision.
Right.
And the reality is it took several years and it was a very slow evolving process. Like, I was always hacking on something on the side, and kind of one of the core values that we have here at RightPoint is innovation and thinking about kind of personal projects and how do you innovate and hack and do things like Hack Day and incorporate that into the work that we're doing for clients. And so I was hacking for years and years before I started my own company. I had some of my own shareware products, and they were never making enough money to kind of pay the bills or pay the rent or have an office or have employees. But I was kind of doing, quote unquote, my business, my company, Raiz Labs, for a while. At a certain point, the money that I had made from Microsoft ran out. And so I took a day job. I took a real hey, I need a salary. I need to cover health.
Oh, so you had left Microsoft, started working on your own, and then the money, the well went dry. So then you got another job.
I got another job.
Got it.
And
Okay.
so I did that for about 6-8 months. And then that company ended up having a layoff. And so it was actually, in hindsight, it was great.
Right.
Because I could focus. And I was close to the tipping point where Raiz Labs at the time was making enough money that I could pay the rent and could kind of support myself. And so that was kind of the jumping off point where I was like, you know what, I'm really close to that tipping point where I could just go do this. And that was honestly the shove I needed out the door. And so I said, you know what, thank you. I will go figure this out full time. So I actually was pretty psyched about it and just started spending more time on it. So I don't think it was an overnight decision. Like I said, I'd been working on it for probably about a year and a half separately from that particular point in time. And so I had some shareware products, I had some customers, I had some consulting that I had done on nights and weekends.
And it was just you at this point?
It was just me, yeah. And at a certain point I was like, you know what, I can spend more time on this.
Right.
But it wasn't, I think for anyone thinking about starting their own business, I think the easiest way to do it is to think about how it can support, or how you can start that and bootstrap that process within the confines of what you're doing right now. And so people who are entrepreneurial, like, go do it. Don't make excuses. Kind of figure out what you want to do. Start kicking the tires. Not every business is a good idea. I had plenty of things that were terrible. Like, my original thing for Raiz Labs was building photo software, and spent a ton of time, probably a year and a half, hacking on a project, selling shareware, setting up a website, doing SEO, doing a bunch of stuff, getting some clients, and it didn't really go anywhere. It had a ton of fun, but just didn't pan out, and so pivoted a couple times just on my own until I found something that I thought was working and valuable and I had fun doing.
Well, it didn't go anywhere, brother. It got you on the No Gradient podcast.
Well, yeah.
Let's just say that.
Here, yeah.
Was there any? I'm curious about the pressure. You didn't have any kids at this point when you were first starting out, but was there still? Did the pressure ever get to you regarding keeping up with the rent, keeping up with the bills, stuff like that, or was that managed okay and internally?
I think early on it was fine, just because I was when I was 20, 25, like I had an apartment.
Right.
That was essentially the only kind of hard cost that I had to go figure out. And that's at that point I did have a day job. So from an entrepreneurship standpoint, it was, hey, I need to pay the rent. Well, work is paying the rent. So I didn't have a real issue there. And because I didn't have lots of obligations beyond that, I could stay up till 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning, coding, working on whatever I wanted for myself. Again, it was hard work, but I didn't mind it, and so it actually gave me energy to go do some of the stuff that I had to do during the day. So obviously don't take a job that you don't enjoy. Ideally, enjoy everything, line up those things. But there was certainly a lot of stuff that in my day job at the time, I was like, this isn't ideal, but it gave me a great platform of stability to go explore, talk to lots of engineers, understand how engineering processes work and other stuff, and experiment and play around with new technology. Right.
That notion of platform stability. So before I started working, professionally after graduating and whatnot, I think that the whole narrative around anyone that started their own thing, it was always, you got to quit your job and you got to go all in on it. And like, that's the only way you got to make it happen. I think this notion of, okay, well, you can still, keep a day job. There's no reason to take an unnecessary risk. And then ramp up your side thing as much as you can. And then when the time is right, cut that umbilical cord and fly free. I think that sounds
totally
to be
agree. I think it is important for folks, and I advise lots of entrepreneurs and lots of startup folks. And there are definitely companies where they're hedging too much and they have enough traction, or they have some customers, they have some folks who are interested, and they aren't jumping in. And so there's definitely the know when you're ready to go jump in versus, hey, I have this idea, or I like to. I have this expression. I say I have half an idea, and I use that expression as permission for other people to poke holes in it, in my half an idea, or to add their other half or contributions to it. But when a startup or when an idea or an entrepreneurship thing is really early on, it's really fragile, and you as an entrepreneur, unless you have a lot of personal wealth, are also really vulnerable and fragile. So serial entrepreneurs, people who have been there, done that, they can jump in immediately. A lot of folks who, maybe they're graduating college, they don't necessarily have a huge nest egg to fall back on. Maybe they didn't work at Google, Microsoft, wherever. You aren't able to do that. When I left Microsoft, I did jump in with both feet for about a year until I blew all my money. And then I was like, okay, I need the stability. And so it's finding the balance. And I would also say that different people have that balance at different points in their lives. Like right now, for some folks, it's like, this is the time, let's jump in. Maybe they don't have obligations beyond what they want to do mentally from an entrepreneurship standpoint. There are other times when they're like, I have either family or work or other things that they actually want the stability. So risk and entrepreneurship are, and life balance are actually very closely intertwined. Not a lot of folks talk about that, but it's important to have the balance and know when you're ready and when you're not ready to make those leaps. Right
on. I'm curious. So you were CEO of Raiz Labs for, would you consider yourself CEO when you started in 2003, technically with the...
I mean, I used to call myself a founder.
Because
it as a one-person company, you don't want to be like overly ego, like, hey, look at me, I'm the CEO of myself. Right.
I'm on Southwest. They allow you to do I think it's a prefix or something. I've experimented with just choosing CEO as the prefix and see if they treat me any different, and they don't. So
They don't. They really don't.
It was an experiment.
Get to fly in the back.
Yeah, exactly. So how is it now that Right Point's acquired Raiz Labs and you're not the head guy? I'm curious, how has that transition been?
I mean, and again, I do think it's personal for everyone. For me,
Right.
it's been actually really good.
Right.
Like first of all, I love being CEO. I think it's a
Right.
lot of fun. You get to be in charge of everything.
Right.
But at the same time,
You're
it's
in charge
also
of everything.
awful.
Right.
And you're in charge of everything.
Right,
And
right.
so, like what I was saying earlier, it's important to identify the risk profile that you want at different points in your life. And so when I started Raiz Labs, I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. I
Right.
didn't really have any financial obligations, and I didn't really care. And I could work 100 hours a week. It wasn't a big deal. I could just go do it.
Right.
I think as the company scaled, and specifically now, not that, hey, I'm going to go sit on a beach or anything. I actually love working on innovation and products, but I have a very different risk profile. So for me, not being CEO for now, I'm actually
Right.
really happy. I get to focus on innovation, work with our clients on really exciting new tech. I'm thinking about medical incubation, how we could build new technologies, utilizing mobile devices for saving people's lives. And I'm really enjoying that. It's much more focused for me. I don't have to think about revenue and EBITDA and profitability and a lot of financial stuff.
Right.
And again, I've learned all that stuff. I've gotten kind of my School of Hard Knocks
Yep.
MBA.
Yep.
But it's good not to think about some of that stuff and really dive deep into technology and product and some of the other stuff that we're doing.
Right on. Cool. Well, I wanna riff on some of the things. I think some of the big things in tech going on right now. I'm curious your opinion on some of these things. Mainly because I think I have this kind of joke inside my own head. I haven't shared it, but I'll share it now for the first time. I think it kind of surprised me that you see these keynotes, Google I/O, they'll have their, they'll have some big keynotes announcing all their new stuff. Apple have big keynotes announcing new products, new iOS versions, blah, blah, blah. And it's mostly people interested in tech that watch these. But increasingly I'm thinking these products, Google, Apple, Microsoft, some of these big companies have such a big impact on our lives. It's almost like people should be watching these over, like the State of the Union address or something like that. I think to myself, like, it's something simple like Apple and Google both announced these kind of well-being things in Android and iOS that help you kind of take a step back from the apps, put time limits on them, things like that, monitor notifications and stuff like that. Those types of things across billions of people using these products has a huge impact, and especially with how much we're using these devices. So I think I've always thought, like, damn, people, when I'm watching this keynote, it's like my dad should be watching this. Like, he uses an iPhone every day. I'm curious what your thought is on that.
Yeah, I think there's interesting nuggets in those keynotes, and
Right.
I used to be really excited about them. I'm now come at them from a little bit of skepticism.
Okay.
There's a lot of awesome stuff unveiled at these various things, and from watching whether it's Google conferences or Apple WWDC or F8 or Amazon's conference,
Right.
there's amazing nuggets, but there's also a lot of BS.
Right.
And
Totally.
if you're not technical and you're watching this and you're like, oh,
Right.
wow, Apple has a music social network called Ping. This is going to,
Right.
No, it's not. And
Right.
the people who understand technology have a better time filtering the BS from the reality, and they know
Right.
which tech companies are better at telling the truth on various different things. Like,
Right.
you could have the exact same product, and I was actually talking to someone from Google. This was a number of years ago. They were super excited because Google had RFID payments. This was kind of in the early days of mobile payments, and they were like, Google Wallet, we have this new technology. It's
Right.
RFID. It's going to change payments forever.
Absolutely.
And like, they were super psyched about it. And I had to explain to this guy at Google, I'm like, this is really cool. And
Right.
as a technologist, I'm super psyched about this. But I'm like, you guys don't have the puzzle. And he's like, what do you mean? He's like, well, here's how Apple's going to do it. Apple's going to get on stage, and at the time, Apple hadn't announced Apple Pay. And
Right.
they're going to say, we have this new technology. It's in your iPhone, and we've partnered with the biggest banks and the biggest retailers, and it's being unveiled today. And you can use it at 100 million, whatever, right?
Right.
And that is Apple's playbook, because they're not just about the technology. They're about the story arc and connecting it to the mom-pop consumer.
Right.
Google is much more on the technology side.
Yes.
So like as a filter, when Google goes on stage and announces like, hey, we have Google Assistant doing this magical phone calling of restaurants and
duplex
booking hair appointments.
Right.
My technology radar goes off and says, good job, Google. We'll see that in 5 years, maybe, or not at all.
Right.
Whereas if Amazon went up on stage and said, hey, we're doing this, I'd be like, well, they've actually shown a lot. They're a little bit further ahead in terms of voice and actual deployment of skills and devices. They're less advanced in terms of AI. So depending on what they're saying, my kind of yay, nay filter goes off. So I think people should be paying attention to technology stuff. And so whether you're reading your newspaper or blog or things like that, there's lots of good filters like Walt Mossberg or Washington Post, reading these tech things and kind of filtering them down and distilling what's truth versus what's BS. But I think it's all super important to pay attention to at some level.
Right. I want to ask about. So I have a list of some companies. I just want to kind of get your hot take on, and just where you think they're at, where you think they're going. And I want to start with Facebook. I personally think that Facebook. I think the narrative, so particularly around kind of, especially the way the New York Times or some of these kind of more non-tech publications have covered them, I've been a little. I think they've done a pretty bad job. For one, I think Facebook. So the classic thing is Facebook's destroying our democracy, and Russia used Facebook ads. I think they spent 100,000 ads. The best example is a lot of people, this one Democrat, I forgot who it was, I think it was a senator, but he tweeted out, they paid in, what's the Russian currency, rubles?
Rubles.
Yeah, rubles. They paid in rubles. Brother Bear, what do you think they're going to pay in? Facebook is a global company. Of course, a Russian, they're going to pay in rubles. They accept, dozens and dozens of different currencies. So I think there's like this narrative, okay, Russia bought $100,000 equivalent worth of ads, and we think that's the reason that we're in the situation we're in now. I don't know if I buy that. I think that's the narrative, but I'm curious what you think.
I mean, at a high level, I think Facebook's an interesting company. I think they are really smart to diversify their core platform, not just in the core Facebook.com, but Instagram is a really strong brand and very different mentally for a lot of folks.
Do you think they should have been allowed to acquire Instagram?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think as any company, I mean, I'm all for free democracy and people can go do those types of things. I think Facebook is smart to both acquire Instagram and Oculus and start to explore different areas. I use the core Facebook.com service very little.
Right.
I know a lot of folks who use it a lot. I think with any tool, it's just a tool.
Right.
And so people have to figure out what it's useful for and what it's not. I happen to use Twitter a lot. I use it for certain things because I know anything I say on Twitter is public. And so it's a really good way for me to follow people who I don't know. I find that Facebook's purpose, or at least the way I understand it, is really useful for communicating with people you already know as opposed to with strangers. And I personally prefer to communicate with people I know in person rather than, via, some other website. And so I enjoy talking to people face to face much more than I enjoy posting stuff. For posting stuff, I enjoy Instagram much better than I do Facebook. And politics is actually one of the reasons. Like, there's a lot of political stuff, and a lot of it is noise that happens on Facebook where you really have toxic discussions.
Totally.
And I don't think it's healthy for learning another perspective or actually resolving anything.
Right.
And it kind of starts lots of anger, flame, posting. And I'm like, there's certainly a place for that. I personally don't enjoy it, and so I spend my online time in other places. But as a company, I think they're doing some interesting things. I think Zuck has matured as a founder significantly over the last 10 years. I think there's a lot of depth in growing that company has done, and a lot more sophistication.
Right. You mentioned these things are tools, and I think that's a great way to view these things, because a lot of people will come at, I think, Twitter. I think people, it's one, I think in my mind, one of the more misunderstood tools, because it's very easy to misuse Twitter. I think if you follow a bunch of people, you follow just a bunch of accounts kind of haphazardly, and before you know it, your feed is just a bunch of screaming. But I'm curious, if a tool is very easy to misuse, is there not some blame that should be put on the actual product? So, Facebook, for example, you mentioned the dialogue around politics. It's very easy to get, see your uncle tweet some whatever, or not tweet, post some random, political thing that is just complete ignorance. And people rally around that, and then shit just spreads like wildfire on there. And I'm curious, if it's that easy for that stuff to happen on Facebook, do they have an obligation to make their tool less less likely to do those sorts of things?
I don't think they have an obligation to.
Okay.
And I think people have to be careful. A lot of folks have kind of, certainly on Twitter, been upset with Jack for not enforcing certain Twitter regulations. Right. At the end of the day, it's his company. If you don't like Twitter, go start your own company.
Right.
Go use another tool. It has a lot of positives along with its negatives. I've certainly seen people opt out of Twitter at certain points in time.
Yeah.
I have had family opt out of Facebook and decide to close and delete their Facebook accounts. And so I think it's really individual, and it does change with both society and timing. There are certain times that the tool does not do what it wants you to do. Like you could, this podcast could blow up and I could get angry tweets and decide that, I want to turn off my Twitter because I'm getting too many at mentions.
Yeah, first of all, that would be the best case scenario for this podcast, brother.
Yeah, it's going to shut me down. So.
Yeah, right on. What about, so you mentioned that, it's Jack's company. What about this notion that, because this is, I think, a lot of the debate about these services is, on one side they're saying, listen, if Facebook or Twitter is shutting down a specific account, recently, I think, what's his name? Steve Jones, the nut job on InfoWars. I even forget his name. Damn, I don't even know his name. But anyway, his podcast was shut down. I think on Twitter he was shut down. But this kind of stuff happens a lot, and I'm curious. It sounds like you take this approach, but I just want to kind of nail down on it. Facebook and Twitter, what if these are private companies, they can do what they want, but what if they started doing things like targeting liberal media or targeting conservative media? Should that be allowed, or do they have some obligation to, being that these are such popular platforms and they are pretty fundamental to getting speech out there, do they have an obligation to make sure that they're doing a good job of this? Or is it more just, this is their company, they can say, we don't want this type of stuff, but this stuff's okay? What do you think?
I mean, my personal view, it's their company. They can do whatever they want. I think if they chose certain political views, it would alienate potentially large portions of their audience, and so they should be careful with that. But any content platform, whether it's YouTube or Twitter or Facebook, and certainly these are not new platforms. There were social networks and MySpaces and AOLs and all sorts of other things before that. Every platform that creates content has to choose what content is appropriate and not appropriate, and every platform that has gone through this, and Reddit and YouTube and some of the others are no stranger to this. Like, when you make those hard choices, you are both protecting your platform to a certain extent, but you're also alienating a certain audience as well. And you have to make those choices for your business. Like, there's no rule book of like, hey, this type of hate speech is okay and this type of hate speech is not.
Right.
You kind of like, it's a very fuzzy line, and every single content platform that opens itself up for the entire world being able to sign up has to answer to those questions. And to a certain extent, it can sometimes be a a national geopolitical thing as well, where certain things are okay in certain countries and certain things are not. Like, I don't have the answer to this. I think as a business, these guys have to, and gals have to think about what are the right pieces of content for their platforms. How should they think about this stuff? And again, the audiences will decide what works and what doesn't. If at the end of the day, Twitter becomes a super toxic place, I will go find a different online forum and place to spend my time.
Right. You mentioned a geolocate, like these services respecting, the regions where they're in, and kind of adapting to each region. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on Apple and Google in China. So Google at first took the approach that we're going to direct any Chinese user that goes to google.com, we're going to direct them to, I think it was the Hong Kong version of the website, or was it Japan? I forget, but some version of the website, this was a while ago, some version that was not censored. But now you're kind of seeing Apple is partnering with some state-run, or rather not state-run, but that the state has a large stake in that company. They're partnering with that data company to offer Apple services in China. And I know Google's starting to do some things here. I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a tricky one.
Right.
At the end of the day, global companies have to figure out how to act globally.
Right.
And we happen to live in a country that has a constitutional right for free speech, which is, sometimes we forget how amazing and awesome
Absolutely.
that is. Like it's we do sometimes take it for granted, and countries that don't have it, when they're working with a global company, whether it's Apple, Google, and there's lots of other global companies as well, they have to go figure out, is it better to allow the state to censor something or take away the service entirely? And I don't have a strong stance on what's the right answer. I think both answers are problematic.
Right.
In kind of if you want to be a purist, both are bad solutions. But I also think that free speech and democracy are a thing that takes time. And so whether it's China or there's lots of other countries that have elements of free speech, but not full, like you can say what you want.
Right.
Where we've been making progress over the last 100 years, and I hope to continue to make more. And so I do think it's important that some of these companies have a long-term view of speech and democracy and progress. Some of these problems aren't going to get solved in the next year or the next decade, but it's important that we figure out as a society how to continue to make progress. Right
on. I'll get in this argument with my sister a lot, and even other people, that I fundamentally believe that technology is making the world a better place. I think a lot of people believe that, but I think what they don't realize is that globally, if you look at infant mortality, if you look at global poverty, if you look at literacy is going up, global poverty is going down. Like, it's pretty insane how much better the world is as a whole, and on some of these key metrics. And I think a lot of that has to do with technology. But one of the areas where I am skeptical is specifically, so you talked about a kind of moving in the right direction with freedom of speech. I think the technology we have today is a dictator's dream come true in terms of, so if you look at the Snowden revelations, right? The General James Clapper went in front of Congress, I think on 2 occasions, and said, we don't do bulk data collection on Americans. We don't do that. Okay, Snowden comes out later, boom, stuff gets leaked. Oh, it turns out they're collecting everything. And that type of thing, this phone in your pocket where you could trigger the mic, you could trigger the camera, you could trigger, you could get location, you could do all these things, you could read text. That was never possible before. So this is one of the areas, and I commend companies like Apple when they, with the FBI saying, oh, give us a backdoor, and they're, them openly taking a stand and saying, no, which I don't know how much because Apple still has the keys to your data with it's end-to-end encrypted, but they still have the keys, allows you to use multiple devices. So I'm a little unclear on that one. But my point is this an area where you think technology is actually could be posing a serious risk to people's freedoms?
I'm trying to remember the joke. There's a joke that says something like, it's easy to make a mistake, but to really screw something up, you need a computer.
Yes.
And so I do think that technology gives us a scale, both for the positive and the negative, that is incredibly powerful, empowering and powerful, and can also be a little bit scary, especially when things either get compromised from a security standpoint or just go wrong. People make a mistake, and we certainly experienced that when someone in Hawaii pressed the wrong button on, a UI that was poorly designed, and suddenly a bunch of real people got texted and were legitimately scared for their lives. So I think as technology continues to advance, we have to ask these questions about security. I think we have to be thoughtful as makers, and certainly you and I spend a lot of our time thinking about technology and trying to understand how it can be used to help people and try to anticipate ways that it could potentially be misused. Again, it's not going to be an easy problem to solve in kind of the abstract.
Right.
But I think it is important that certainly all your listeners, all the makers who are out there building technology, don't just get enamored with the technology itself, but they ask the question, how can this help people?
Right.
I think the microphones and the cameras being on and who has the security keys, these are really important kind of security questions that a lot of both analysts and a lot of companies and a lot of folks are asking and trying to verify. Like, I have talked to a number of folks who are legitimately scared of having an Alexa in their house, for fear that maybe it's spying on me. And I think these are the right questions because it holds folks like Amazon and Google and Siri and anyone else building this tech accountable for thinking through those scenarios and both advancing the state of the art of technology and security and being held accountable to potential risks or misappropriation or misuse.
Right on. Do you think this is do you think a blockchain specifically has any, is there any even semblance of a solve here in terms of owning your data, in terms of like verifying verifying things like, oh, this microphone was not enabled at this time. So specifically that, but also generally, I'm curious your thoughts on the technology.
I mean, I think blockchain is super interesting. I think we're still trying to figure out as a society where it's useful and where it's not. I think there's a lot of potential for it to be used in currency and financial transfer, but there's also a lot of noise. And so
totally.
There are thousands of crypto companies trying to popularize and become the next Bitcoin or Ethereum or Litecoin or whatever coin it happens to be. But this is not yet a technology that people are generally using or that they know they're using.
Right.
There are a couple instances where it's being used behind the scenes by banks or financial transactions. I don't think it's necessarily a good technology to protect the security of the camera on your phone or something of that nature.
Right.
I think it's a good way to exchange information between two people who don't trust each other. And so certainly could be used for, an alternate to email or an alternate to text messaging or something like that. But there's lots of companies exploring it. I'm more of the UI person. So I think about, hey, it's a good distributed database technology, but what are you going to use it for? Or how is it useful for, someone who is non-technical? How would my mom or sister or my cousin use this type of stuff to actually get something done and not have to think about the technology? Because they don't care if the database is distributed or it's hosted on AWS. From their perspective, it's they're using an app or they're using a website.
Right. I think one of the funny things is one of the hard problems about you take a Bitcoin wallet, the simplest example, you have to protect your own keys. You can use another service like Coinbase or something like that, which partially kind of defeats at least some of the purpose of
It completely defeats it.
Right. Well, I mean, I think you can, maybe completely. But I mean, I think the big kind of elephant in the room is, okay, so you own your own keys. Okay, great. I've gotten Twitter fucking fights with people that are like, oh, like blockchain, you got your own keys, like you own your money. Okay, then I say, how do you store this? USB flash drive. And then I say, okay, well, what if you lose the flash drive? Oh, you have another one at your mom's house. Okay, well, what if that one's... This is asking a bunch of people to store duplicate keys in different locations in order to protect their wallet when they can't just go to google.com, do a forgot password, and get their stuff back. I think that's a problem that I think is very fundamental right now, and it's kind of, okay, well, what's the solve there?
There's two problems.
Right.
One is distributed currency, and the other is banking. And the problems are actually different on each one. Like being able to have my money such that I don't have to carry it around is actually super convenient, right? Like I like that if I have to give you money, I don't have to go downstairs to the bank and take money out of the ATM, that I can use the bank as a central repository. And I think there's lots of interesting ways that you could use crypto with existing banking infrastructure. And there's a bunch of interesting scenarios where I actually want to carry money around with me, in certainly third world countries where there's no internet or less access to real-time internet, where I want to exchange currency and finance without having to phone home to a server. And so there's lots of interesting things. There's kind of an intersection where people haven't figured out what they're actually solving.
Right. Totally.
And so there's a lot of noise in the blockchain space, but I'm tracking it. I'm optimistic that in the future there will be more crypto rather than less. And I think a lot of large financial companies that we've talked to are starting to incubate and experiment around with how they can actually use this for something useful.
So do you think within the decade, do you think this is going to be something, is this a paradigm shifting, so we had, we had computers, we had web, we had phones. We're kind of in the smartphone phase right now. Is this another big category, or is it not something that big?
I don't think of it that way.
Okay.
I would say that the analogy I use is when we moved from credit cards to Apple Pay, it wasn't this mental huge shift. It was just, hey, there's a different piece of technology allowing me to do the same thing. And I think crypto will be similar to that I don't want to mentally think about a currency conversion from US dollars to Ethereum to blockchain or Bitcoin. I just want fast transactions with low fees without some of the central, there's a bunch of advantages that you could enumerate with blockchain technology, and currency conversion isn't one of them, or fluctuations of your money all of a sudden disappearing and reappearing again wouldn't be something you'd be like, yeah, that's what I want with my paycheck.
Right. I think of something that I've been kind of meditating on is if you think about the first, I think the torrent protocol in some ways was blockchain before there's actual blockchain, because you have a bunch of people that you don't really trust, and you're all sharing the same file. You're sharing a video, you're sharing a video game, whatever you're sharing. The difference now is that that file that you're sharing, all these different peers, people connected to it, can actually make changes to it and then distribute those changes. So I'm wondering if, okay, maybe blockchain is gonna have, it's gonna have an impact like the torrent protocol had an impact, but I wouldn't say the torrent protocol was a huge paradigm shifting thing. I mean, it allowed you to distribute a bunch of files in a cheap way, and there was some redundancy there because they're all over the world and it's hard to shut down. But it wasn't. That's kind of where I'm like, maybe blockchain is just that.
I would say it this way: when BitTorrent first came on the scene, it was super exciting that all of a sudden you could go to one place, find a song, and just play it, and I was like, this is amazing. You just couldn't do that, and BitTorrent actually opened up, and iTunes would not have been possible if it weren't for BitTorrent, right? And
Right.
so it created a legitimate user experience that people wanted, and people wanted to just go to a central site, pick a song or an album, and just listen to it.
Right.
And iTunes and Apple said, hey, we can do that. You know, there's going to be a price to it because musicians should get paid, and artists and albums and record companies should get paid something, and Apple certainly gets a cut of that as well.
Right.
But it made it much easier for someone to say, like, hey, I could steal an album or a song, or I could pay 99 cents. And for me personally, I was like, sure, I'll pay 99 cents. I don't care. Like, it's not that much money.
Right.
And it made it really easy for people to consume digital content. And we've seen the same thing, that BitTorrent made it possible for a technology like Netflix to exist as well.
I love that point.
And
right.
I think right now we're seeing this proliferation and exploration and a bunch of kind of investor action in blockchain and cryptocurrency.
Right.
And I do think that there will be, quote unquote, the killer app. And again, it's hard to say what it will be,
Right.
you know, whether it'll be Coinbase or whether it'll be Ripple or one of these other or Ethereum or one of these other, where someone will be like, hey, we're taking the guts of this core idea and making it something incredibly consumable by someone who's non-technical. And
Right.
that's really what iTunes did. It said, hey, this piratey thing that's complicated and techy, and
Right.
you need to really kind of understand, you know, it was easy enough, but you kind of need to understand what's going on. We're going to make it really consumable. And so I'm sure that there are folks at, you know, the big companies, whether it's Facebook, Apple, Google, Microsoft, et cetera, thinking about how to commercialize some of the technology around crypto. I'm sure all of the big banks are thinking about this as well. So I
Right.
wouldn't be surprised if Fidelity and E-Trade and kind of all the other guys are.
My favorite thing with these big companies is enterprise blockchain. We're gonna have an enterprise like blockchain thing that we're gonna manage and own. It's that defeats the whole. That's just called a server. Why are you? It's not. There's no value you're adding if you're one company owning a blockchain, or even partnering with other companies. I think that's kind of like IBM's ads on supply chain. Oh, blockchain. It's just making me like, oh, these guys are. I think they're kind of pandering or just trying to. So
just to touch on that, I
Hit
do
me.
think there's some really interesting things in supply chain that have not been figured out. And I
Right.
was talking to someone about, last, maybe it was 5-6 months ago, we had the big lettuce scare, and people were like, don't
Right.
eat lettuce. And it was like, well, why aren't we eating lettuce? And the reason we weren't eating lettuce was because no one knew where it came from. And so
But you don't need blockchain to solve that problem, do you?
Well, here's the problem. There is no central authority for where stuff came from. So if you're Panera Bread and you're buying lettuce from Joe Farmer Distributor,
Mhm.
and Joe Farmer Distributor is buying lettuce from, Al's Farm, and he's getting it from so-and-so, like there's 4 or 5 hops. And so
Right.
Panera doesn't actually know where they got their stuff. And so at the end of the day, you're going to have thousands of companies collaborate on data in some way. And so either the FDA has to stand up a database and say, hey, we're going to create a central database for tracking of stuff,
Right.
or there's the potential to use a distributed technology like blockchain. Again, I agree with you. I don't know that blockchain has to be the answer,
Right.
but it has some really interesting kind of algorithmic properties that make it interesting for this type of negotiation amongst multiple companies.
Right. One quick thing on that, and then we'll move off blockchain. But something funny I read was like, okay, so even if the supply chain stuff is on the blockchain, it doesn't mean someone can't just lie and say, oh, these potatoes are actually from South America when they're actually from Ireland. Like just because it's on the blockchain just doesn't automatically, it's not a magic wand that just makes it secure, accurate.
That's absolutely true.
Right.
And that's where the cryptography means that you can actually trace the token or security. Like if you're Panera Bread and you only give out, 5 distributor tokens, you can cryptographically sign and know that lettuce was actually signed by a key that
Right.
was given to ABC distributor.
Right.
That they would have to have messed up, which again, people mess up and screw up
Right.
their security. But the idea with distributed supply chain is that there is a level of trust that you're giving from a security authentication standpoint to your different distributors. And this works for produce, it works for steel, it works for automotive parts or Boeing or other large manufacturing processes where you may have hundreds or even hundreds of thousands of companies touching a particular part that gets assembled together into a single thing.
Right. Yeah, well, I guess we'll check back in and we'll listen to this podcast in 10 years and see what happened.
See how we did.
I'm curious what you think of, we riffed a little bit on this, but Tesla and Elon Musk and kind of what he's doing. I think first time I was in, well, I guess it was the second time I was in a Tesla, but I was recently in a Model 3, and after 10 seconds of being in that thing, just looking around and looking at the console, all I could think is Detroit is fucked. Like I was like, I've never felt this way about a car ever. Just the app and then the way I was blown away. And I'm curious what you think about what he's doing and how he's doing it. Yeah, hit me.
So I'm first of all, I'm biased because A, I have some shares of Tesla, and B, I have a Model S, so I'm a huge fan.
Right.
But I agree with you. I think they're doing some really both innovative and really smart long-term things, and I think that's why I'm bullish on Tesla. I think a lot of folks have said, like, hey, the things that they're doing are easily reproducible by Detroit and GM and Volkswagen, and there's a lot of folks doing electrical cars now. But the things that make Tesla unique are not just the fact that they're putting batteries in cars.
Right.
They are several steps ahead on a number of infrastructure type things that it will take fast followers probably a decade or longer to start to catch up.
Right.
And so you can kind of look through some of the smart things that they're doing on the app and some of the smart things that they're doing on their supercharger network, some of the smart things that they're doing on UI, some of the smart things that they're doing in battery tech. And that's great. I think a lot of folks will start to think about how do you catch up and build those product elements. But they're also doing really smart things with autonomous driving. They're also doing smart things in terms of mapping technology. They're doing a lot of smart things with auto updating. They're, in my mind, the only car I'm aware of that actually has a persistent 3G connection that the owner doesn't pay for.
Right.
And so that unlocks a bunch of user experience scenarios that just simply aren't possible with any other car that I'm aware of. And these aren't, some of them are simple, like lock, unlock, but things like auto update, they actually happen in both directions. I'm not sure all folks understand this. There are hundreds of thousands, I don't know how many cars Tesla has on the road, probably about 100,000, 80,000, something like that. All of these cars are collecting a ton of data. Right. And because these cars are always connected, they're able to pass that data back up to Tesla. So I think they're doing a lot of really smart things. I think from the business side, they're still a young company. And so they're getting a lot of kind of market pressure for, hey, get to profitability. I actually think that they'd be on a much better path if they just said, we're going to be like Amazon and we're not going to be profitable for the next 30 years. And let us just do our thing. And again, they have to kind of figure that out. And, I'm mentally on board for the long haul. Like, I think they're going to be a long-term energy company. I don't think of them as a car company. I think of them as a long-term innovation energy company. Right. And so the things that they're doing, not just in cars, but in solar, in power storage, in kind of a bunch of other avenues are super interesting.
A lot of people, I think, are put off by some of the things Elon Musk does. I mean, I agree. I think he'll tweet out some just stupid things, and he'll say, there's that, calling that God, what country was that when they did the rescue mission? And he called, I think, the guy a pedophile or something like that. Obviously, I don't condone any of that, but any time someone says, "Oh, I'm so tired of Elon Musk," and blah blah blah, I say, listen, I get all that. But what he's doing, in my mind, the end justifies the means. Like, I get he's saying some stupid shit and maybe insulting some people. I get that, and I don't condone that at all. But he's trying to save the world. Like, he's trying to move us to he's tackling huge problems. Like, with SpaceX, and like you said, they're an energy company doing innovative things there, which is has a huge impact. So I think the people's calculus when they view Elon Musk, they say, oh, he's just a billionaire, blah blah blah. Like he's just an. It's like, don't listen to all the noise. Look at the problems that he's actually working on. Like this guy he's tackling big things. When he sold PayPal, he could have said, okay, I'm gonna sell PayPal, just live on my, be a rich dude the rest of my life and be fine with that. But he dumped all his money into Tesla, and I think he actually cares. So that's
yeah. I mean, his personality certainly comes across on Twitter, and
right.
He appears to be a very incredibly smart individual, but also quirky and at times twitchy, especially if you get his 3 a.m. tweets. And so
he's the Donald Trump of techie. Yes.
He's I didn't say that, but
right.
I wouldn't entirely disagree.
There we go.
I think just going back to Twitter, I think you have to understand what the medium is good for and how you want to use it. And I do think, and I would say this for really any executive, and I've certainly been on Twitter when I was CEO, I had to put a filter on myself that when you're running a company or leading a large portion of folks, people do read into everything you say, for better or worse. And so I don't like filtering myself, but I did talk about it with a couple folks, and it's actually better to keep some of your ideas, opinions, just internal. I think Steve Jobs had the exact kind of opposite of Elon in terms of his relationship with the public, that he would notoriously not say anything publicly until he'd crafted exactly the perfect message and rehearsed it 1,000 times and had it just exactly airtight, rehearsed exactly how he wants it. And then, he would say, I would unveil it like a package, and it would be this beautiful present, and it would be timed in lights and colors, and everything would be perfect. And again, there's no other Steve Jobs. And so people have to understand what their relationship is, both with their company, with their employees, and with the public, and then understand the pros and cons of each approach. So I love the honesty that Elon brings to Twitter and his relationship with the people who follow him or send him messages, things like that. I do think there's potentially a risk there as well, where he'll make commitments to end consumers for things that may distract the core of his engineering team from the bigger vision that he has for the company as well. So Twitter can make you twitchy. That's both a positive and a negative thing. So people have to be aware of that.
Right. Kind of I think an extreme example of ends, maybe or maybe not justifying the means, but a company having a big impact that's not, necessarily doing things in the right way. I think Uber's a pretty good example of that. I think obviously their Susan Fowler, when she released that blog post in early 2017 about her reflecting on one very, very strange year at Uber, she was making sure that she didn't want to sound complainy or anything like that. She just wanted to say, listen, this is what happened, because she knew people would be trying to poke holes in everything she said. So she was very, it's a great blog post. I recommend people read it. But I think with that specifically, I think that's a case where, and I'm curious. I'm kind of playing devil's advocate here, but again, I'll bring up my sister. Every time I say, I Ubered somewhere, she's like, I can't believe you did that. Like, you should use Lyft. So I just say rideshare now to avoid it. But like the whole delete Uber campaign and all this stuff. Obviously, they got a lot of flack for, they got the CEO got ousted, and so it was a big fucking deal. But I'm curious what you think, and I almost want you to push back on me, but unless you don't disagree with what I'm saying, and I don't even feel good about this opinion. I think it's a little rough, but I look at Uber similar to the way I look at Elon Musk kind of doing his maybe not so great thing. So Uber had a horrible corporate culture, but if you look at the company and what they've actually done, and they've given a bunch of people. Obviously, there's issues with the way they've treated their drivers, and now they allow tipping and stuff like that. But they've given a lot of people job opportunities for part-time jobs, and we can argue about, or not part-time, but flexible jobs. They've made transportation cheaper for a lot of people. Can easily the experience of ordering an Uber versus a taxi was a revelation. So I'm curious, in this specific instance, do you think that I look at Uber and say, I like part of me thinks, well, the horrible corporate culture and they are fixing it, but what they've done for millions and millions and millions of people is, in my opinion, very positive overall. And I'm curious how do you balance those two things?
I mean, if I were to comment on Uber, I would say, I think they ruined their brand forever.
Okay.
And, in terms of their impact as a company, I think they've had an incredible impact on society and the world, and how I transport from different places. But I, similar to your sister, I currently use Lyft as my first go-to, and I think that's a shame. And there's definitely a huge entrepreneurial lesson there, not only for employee culture and product and long-term valuation. I mean, they were leader, right? They owned the market. They were the frontline leader by a lot.
Right.
And, again, I don't know how that's measured anymore. They're both Lyft and Uber are private companies. And so I think there's speculation on their valuation and their ridership and things like that. Neither company, from my understanding, is profitable yet. But that being said, they have changed how people think about transportation, which I think is really interesting. So from an impact standpoint, they've had an incredible impact, but I don't think having an impact and having a great culture are diametrically opposed.
Right.
There's nothing... They could have had their cake and eaten it too.
Totally.
Like they could have had an amazing culture.
Right.
They could have been whatever, the Google of transportation, right? Or pick whatever, the Disney of transportation.
Right.
Pick some kind of
I like that.
corporate image that is clean and wholesome, and they could have been about the drivers, about the rider experience.
Right.
We've spent some time at Raiz Labs thinking about our mission vision and just making sure that it feels authentic and is aligned. You probably know that I spent some time talking about kind of, our purpose, our why is to improve lives through technology and design. And a lot of thought and wordsmithing went into kind of that phrase, but it was like, okay, well, not every project or app or website is going to be kind of the cure to cancer.
Right.
But if each engineer, each designer, each product person, each individual thinking about software is trying to improve someone's life through the work that we're doing, it'll be a good filter for what we do as a company as a whole. I think Uber, Lyft, or any company should be thinking about how they align their long-term product vision, mission with what really motivates both people inside the company and potentially their customers outside. When I was working at Microsoft, and this was in early 2001, 98 to 2001, Microsoft's mission vision was a computer on every desk.
Right.
And at the time, I felt completely disconnected from this vision. I was like, who cares? Honestly, we were working on Microsoft Windows XP, and I was excited about the operating system, but this was at a time when Microsoft was being sued for being a monopoly.
Right.
We had Windows 95 was, a huge success hit. Windows ME, which I had no part in, not my fault.
Not your fault. Okay, right on. What about Vista though?
Vista.
No, you were out.
I was out by Vista.
Okay, good. Right.
So also not my fault.
Right.
But getting software on every desktop wasn't actually something that most people cared about. It was really, how do you create great software? How do you create user experience? At least the team that I was on. Right. And so I had a bunch of buddies who were on the Xbox project, and they were like, well, we're not really doing the put a computer on everyone's desk either. And so people weren't really aligned with that mission vision. Now compare kind of that mission vision to how the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is acting and behaving now to kind of like cure humankind of like malaria and all these kind of aspirational things. The mission vision of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to kind of, and I forget how they word it, it's like to empower humanity through the creative, there's a bunch of really good thoughts, and I'm like, wow, had they attached that vision mission to what Microsoft was doing in the late 90s, 2001, it
Right.
would have been a very different mental space for a bunch of people. I remember going off and my friends would be like, "Oh, you're going to go work at the evil empire." Like,
Right.
that's what people were saying at the
Totally.
time. And that's how people are feeling about Uber right now. Maybe they can repair their brand and their perception with the marketplace and hire a better CEO and, completely redo their brand, their culture, their relationship with the consumers. But man, that's a multi-billion-dollar hard lesson to learn.
Totally. Now I'm gonna go on record. You actually, you've swayed me a bit for sure, because I think it reminds me of Milton Friedman had that his kind of seminal piece. I think it was in New York Magazine where he said that companies doing quote unquote good, like donating to charity or helping clean up, doing more than they need to do at the expense of shareholders. He was very opposed to that. So he thought that a public company, their only mission is they're only accountable to the shareholders and making the shareholders as much money as possible. But I think something missing in that calculus is, well, it turns out Apple building a sustainable company in terms of being powered completely by renewable energy and having good recycling practices and things like that, turns out that actually makes you more money.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good case studies. Like,
Right.
Ben & Jerry's is not only a great ice cream, but they do a lot of really good things for communities. There's a lot of companies that are really mission, vision, community oriented,
Right.
and they give back. And,
Right.
You can go look through every industry, whether it's Southwest in the airline industry, there's a bunch of things in the food industry, lots of technology companies do this as well. And if you do it well, customers actually react to you.
Right.
I was describing the why process and what is our mission vision, and there's a great both book and YouTube video of Start With Why, and it talks through kind of the mechanics of how to think about a business. And if you have a good why for your business, consumers will reward you for it. Like, I want to
Right.
go spend my money at companies that have
Right.
missions, visions that are aligned with my why. That if my why is, having a positive impact, then I'm going to want to give my money to other companies that are mission, vision aligned with that as well. Again,
Right.
assuming that a lot of the other things are aligned as well. And oftentimes they are. Like, if I'm choosing which car to buy, the fact that Elon Musk has a mission vision to put someone on Mars, I'm like,
Right.
that's freaking cool. Now,
Right.
is that going to be my buying decision for buying a Tesla versus buying a BMW? I don't know. It probably not the ultimate decision, but
Right.
could it nudge a couple thousand people in the right
Right.
direction? It might. If I knew that, hey, this is a renewable thing, and Ben & Jerry's is giving certain amount to all these good causes, would it get me to choose that versus Breyers or the Stop & Shop brand? Maybe, maybe not. Like,
Right.
I think these things are small nudges, and yeah, I think businesses have a responsibility to shareholders, but doing good is actually good business.
Right. Doing good is actually good business. I love that. Okay, two more things. And I really appreciate your time here. And I know I don't want to keep you too long, but I can riff with you all day.
Well, I don't want to keep your listeners. I want to keep you happy. So
Yeah. Damn. Okay. Respect.
it's for the people.
Yeah. Okay. Right on. I'm artificial intelligence, machine learning. I pretty much wholesale don't ever even say artificial intelligence because I think what people, when they say artificial intelligence, what they're really talking about is a kind of a general AI that can just attack a whole bunch of different problems. Like a human is, I think, think of a human, we can do a bunch of different things. Right now, we have machine learning, we have kind of narrow AI, right, where we can solve very specific problems, like, recognize a dog in this photo, recognize this face in this photo. It's not a general AI approach. It's a very specific problem being solved with machine learning. I'm curious, what's your take? Where do you see this going? Do you think is it going to be huge? What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think we're going to continue to see artificial intelligence in more and more applications. I think a lot of folks don't even realize that they're interacting and using artificial intelligence a lot every day.
Right.
Again, there's very simple examples, right? You log into Netflix, pretty much everything that you see on screen is driven by
Right.
machine learning and artificial intelligence. I think when people talk about AI, they're actually not talking about what we see oftentimes in terms of artificial intelligence and kind of A/B testing and those types of things. They're actually talking about intelligence without the artificial.
Right.
They want machines to actually be smart and make smart decisions.
Right.
We're seeing some progress in that, but I do think it's maybe in our lifetime, maybe not. This stuff just moves slowly. I think we've made incredible progress that I can now say a number of phrases that my home speaker will recognize and do semi the right thing.
Right.
Oftentimes, I wrote a blog post where, I equate a lot of the, particularly voice, but voice is very much in that AI space, to the DOS era of artificial intelligence, where I need to have the command syntax correct.
Yes. Right.
And before user interfaces, you needed to, change directory with CD.
Right. One character off, you're done.
CD space directory file name / and then command parameters and things like that.
Right.
That's very much how we're interacting with a lot of our artificial intelligence. I can't just say like, hey, I'd like to hear this song.
Right.
I have to start my phrase with, the name of my digital agent. Like if I wanted to ask you something, I'm not like, Richard, tell me the last time you went,
Right, exactly.
I can just say, hey, when's the last time,
I like that.
Intelligence is really natural, and we have this, like I said, a DOS-like relationship where you need to say, computer, ask this API service what the endpoint of this parameter is in this context, and it just feels unnatural. There are certain things that are starting to be more natural, and I think both Amazon and Google are making good progress in this direction, but I do think it'll be a long journey. Folks who are using technology or building technology should be looking for opportunities to infuse just normal intelligence into their software applications, so it feels like it's doing the right thing for people. Intelligence doesn't require the hard AI, artificial intelligence. It just means that we're programming our tools and technologies to try to be intuitive to the things that we as humans would want them to do. There's lots of very low-hanging fruit to provide either customizations or personalizations or automation. These are not hard AI problems, but they make software more intelligent, more friendly. And there are also opportunities to leverage some of the AI work that's being done, and whether it's IBM Watson or Google or Amazon, TensorFlow, a bunch of other technologies where you can pull in libraries or pull in models and allow your software to do even more intelligent things.
Right. I forgot exactly what the stat is, but I think something like an order of magnitude, the code at Google, the code that runs all of Google services and all their stuff, an order of magnitude more has been written by through machine learning mechanisms. That is, so it hasn't been written by a human. Has been written by just neural networks or whatever, automatically generated, versus someone actually in an IDE typing that code out. So I think that's just fascinating. But in terms of,
it is fascinating, but I don't want it to freak out listeners, because it's actually it's not that scary. Like when you go to Google Photos and you say, show me pictures of summer, and somehow Google can show you your summer photos and it knows what that is. Like, yes, there is technology that wrote some code to interpret the word summer and go look at pictures and say, is that a time of year? Is that a type of shade of color? Like, yes, there's a bunch of really interesting stuff happening, but it's not that there are millions of lines of code. That's actually a computer science problem that has not been solved. Computers can write very simple things, but they can't actually write very technical libraries or things that have branching logic. They can solve little, and I don't mean to make it smaller than it is. It's incredibly impressive, but there's certain classes of problems that machine learning and that type of tech can solve, but it's also not, HAL from Space
Right.
Odyssey, where it can actually do intelligence and reacting to abstract questions and things like
Right.
that.
When you say little problems, it makes me think of something I've kind of that's fascinating me in the problems that machine learning solves. It's like the most kind of invisible thing. So I think of GitHub, for example. When you submit a pull request, so when you submit code, for the listeners out there, GitHub's a service that you can submit code. It stores code and allows people to review it. There's a mechanism for that, but it'll recommend people to review your code. So it'll look at the Git history of the code, or people that. So maybe this isn't even machine learning, but it'll look at who's touched this file, when they last touched it, all this stuff, and it'll recommend. Very simply, it's just a little list. It'll recommend, I think this person should probably review it. Or what Android's doing in Android P, when you swipe up with the launcher, it'll have 2 recommended actions. This is a small little thing, but it's like, or at the bottom, it'll recommend 5 different apps. It's like very kind of small things, but it's not taking much space up on the screen, but it's like, it always kind of blows my mind. It's like, that's so powerful to just get that one little thing right there. Is like, there's actually a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. And it's like, it makes me think of, technology's best when it kind of disappears, right? Like, I don't know that that's machine learning. I don't even care. It's just gently, it's like, oh, here, I think you maybe want to do this. And it's just like, I don't even have to know I'm using machine learning to just, I just think that's
actually
cool.
where it plugs in the best. Like, there's
Right.
a notion, I think it was a Malcolm Gladwell book called Nudge, where a lot of the simple things, the small things
Keep talking. I want to make sure you're still in the frame. Keep talking. The small things that influence, keep talking. I'm listening.
The small things that influence our behavior have dramatic impacts. So when Netflix says, hey, this is the next video that you want to watch, it wasn't a lot of code, it wasn't a lot of technology that they needed to make, but it created a large shift in end behavior. And similar for GitHub, it's not a huge feature for them to say, to do a Git look back on who are the people who touch this file, who may be the right people to go do this, but it has a huge end effector reaction by the things that it actually creates. It makes your job as a developer easier, and it makes the person who's getting pulled in more engaged in that behavior as well. There's lots of opportunities for software developers in general, building technology, to think about these small things that have outsized impacts to them.
Right on. Kind of closing out here, I'm curious what you think. I have something that I'll constantly actually reference this article that I wrote on Twitter. It's called "Big Tech is Eating the World," and I'm curious what you think about Apple, Google, Microsoft, Facebook. These
FANG,
yeah, exactly. Benedict Evans of Andreessen Horowitz, he kind of says, okay, well, the giants look impenetrable until they're not, right? They look like Microsoft was, owned computing until in terms of user base, Android completely beat them, and Apple beat them in terms of mobile computing. So they look impenetrable until they're not. The counter to that, and I've said this to him, is in Amazon included. I think these companies are at a point where I really, and this is you've been in tech longer than I have, but I think this time feels a little different. I don't see as much of an opportunity for another startup to come along and unseat some of these guys. I mean, if you look at Microsoft specifically, if you look at Benedict, that's kind of Benedict Evans' classic example. Microsoft is doing the best they've ever done. So they were not beaten at all. Yes, they lost mobile, but they are doing a ton of other things and extremely, extremely successful still. So I think his token example is actually wrong. And I'm curious, do you think we're at a point where these companies are they getting to, is big tech eating the world, or is this just, you think companies come and go and this is just another part of the cycle?
I would say companies come and stay more often than they go.
Right.
And so I think there is absolutely room for new tech companies, and we see a lot of examples of people exploring and nipping at the heels of these folks. Not all of them are successful. Again, it's up to the companies and the entrepreneurs to kind of pave that ground. And so we've seen a bunch of interesting companies. Some of them go public, like Snap and
Right.
Dropbox.
Well, hold on. I want to talk
folks
about Snap for 1 second, because Snapchat that's kind of the big, in recent memory, that's one of the big tech companies that's come out, right? But their entire infrastructure is built on Amazon and Google.
But it's not about the infrastructure. Like, all of these companies are interconnected in many ways. Microsoft is using Adobe tools to do the design. People at Apple are using Azure for certain things. Like,
Right.
these companies are interdependent, which is fine. That's not problematic. If
Right.
Netflix chooses to use AWS, that's fine, and maybe that's good for Netflix, and maybe that's good for Amazon. If at a certain point in time, Netflix decides to build their own data center infrastructure, they can do that too. My only point is that there are a lot of companies that can come and enter the space and become multi-billion-dollar companies. There is a chasm that these companies can cross, I believe. I think it's a hard chasm to cross, where they go from a $5-10 billion company to $100+ billion company, which is the new kind of norm of these FANG-sized companies, where they're in the $250 billion.
Right.
I can't even say that.
Right.
It's ridiculous, or up to $1 trillion. But there's a large chasm. It's really hard to get there as any company. But when you look at it, like, Facebook is not an old company. Like, it has not been around for a very long time. It's
Right.
been around for, I think, less than a decade, maybe a decade around.
Right.
And so in the last 10 years, we've had a brand new company come in and do that.
Right.
I fundamentally think that there will be a lot of contenders in social, and we've seen that with Snap. Again, they've gotten to a certain stage. I don't know if they'll get larger or not.
Well, Facebook's just copying all their features, though.
Which is fine. They have to be aware of that,
Right.
right? We're going to see new contenders come into operating systems for either virtual or augmented reality. Again, it could be the existing players. So it may be Microsoft, it may be Sony, it may be this new upstart in Florida called Magic Leap.
Right.
You just don't know. Like, sometimes these things take off and sometimes they fizzle. I would say Tesla could really be a contender in that quadrant of technology companies. Right now, they're playing more in the transportation energy space. There could be other folks that come in. So I do think that there's a large moat, meaning there's a lot of investment institutionally that we've put in. But outside of kind of that tech bubble, there's other companies like IBM that we're not even talking about that have also been around for 50, 100 years or whatever, building infrastructure, building moats, building $100+ billion businesses that they're ripe for other startups to say, hey, we have a better way to go do XYZ as well. Right.
Okay. That I think that'll that kind of calms my nerves a little bit. But we'll this is another one of those things I think we'll look back on and see if what happened to these guys, because I don't want to live in a world. I like the fact that companies fail, I like that new ones can come up. I like that. That's what makes it all great. That's how everyone gets better.
Well,
so
think about, and again, like, rewind the clock to again, my memory's not. I was a young lad in the 80s as well, but we used to have DEC, we used to have Sun Microsystems, we used to have a different perception in the market of AOL. I mean, AOL and even Yahoo are not what they used to be. Yahoo used to be the darling of internet companies as well. And so these things do change, and they change with leadership, they change with technology, and they change with the market. So, you can't just look at the negatives, the survival bias, right? Like, we're looking at the companies that survived and saying, like, look at these guys, they all survive. Right. Well, we have to look at the companies that were also there and didn't survive and got outseated or displaced. And so, and the new ones that are quickly rising that we can't even see from where we're sitting yet.
Right. I think the one thing that makes me feel that this time is a little different, and you have me partially convinced, but is that these Google, Apple, Facebook, all these big companies, they specialize in software. I mean, Apple's, I guess, technically they sell hardware, right? They don't sell, well, they sell some software, but they're mainly a hardware company. If you look at how they make money, they have some services. But my point is, software is such especially with things like machine learning, software is such a versatile tool that can apply to so many different things, that it makes me having a kind of being the best at software, having the greatest. I think right now Google. I think people would pretty much say that they are leading the AI race, at least right now. Having that lead is so fundamental and so applicable to so many different things that I'm curious what you think about that, because that's kind of the fact that this tool that they are specializing in can apply to literally everything, not literally everything, but almost everything, is what kind of makes me think, oh shit, well, if they've mastered this tool that can do anything, does that mean I'm gonna be praying to Google one day before I go to sleep?
At the end of the day, it's
Right.
all about individuals, and so
Right.
Google was Larry and Sergey, in college saying, hey, I think we could solve this search engine problem. And at the time, Digital owned AltaVista, and Ask Jeeves was the search engine market and the entire ecosystem already existed.
Right.
And here were two college kids saying,
Right.
hey, we're going to go try to build the search engine. We don't have any money. We don't know how to monetize it. We
Right.
don't want to figure it out. And Digital was this huge, at the time, giant company that was really scary, and IBM was giant and scary,
Right.
and Microsoft was giant and scary,
Right.
and was arguably a monopoly, and Apple was this little twinkle that was kind of annoying Bill Gates at the time, and,
Right.
and the guys at Google were like, hey, we're going to start a search engine company,
Right.
and it blew up because it was a better technology at
Right.
one thing. Like Google they didn't have to solve operating systems and artificial intelligence or anything. They just
Right.
built a better search engine. And I think if any entrepreneur is thinking like, hey, I want to take on the Titans, go figure out one problem
Right.
that you think you can solve better than anyone else. And
Right.
again, if you think you can build a better computer or better phone, yeah, go license an operating system and build better hardware than Apple or whoever you want to compete with. If you think you want to build a better desktop operating system or better office productivity tools, like great, go compete with Microsoft and go
Right.
figure it out. Like I do think there's a lot of opportunity and white space for new companies that come in and change the way we work. And you only have to look at whether it's Dropbox or Slack or some of these other tools that did not exist, even 5 years ago,
Right.
where it's fundamentally changing the way we work. And where this company goes, again, I don't know if some of these technologies will continue to build on their initial success with new success and new business models to get bigger and bigger, or if they'll plateau or decide that they want to be acquired. Like at the end of the day, that's up to those entrepreneurs to decide where they want to take their companies. But the opportunities for new technologies, new entrepreneurs to go disrupt, it's like, game on, let's do it.
Game on, let's do it. I love it. Well, I have to pee extremely badly, so that's typically how these.
We're gonna cut it there.
We're gonna cut it there. That's typically how these things end. But Greg, thank you so much. Thanks so much for coming on. And I like that. Cheers. I don't look at the.
Yeah, follow me on Twitter.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Raiz.
G Raiz.
Yeah, we'll put it in the show notes.
Right. We'll put it in the show notes. I love that. We're real podcast. We have show notes. At Grays. You pronounce it G Raiz, not Grays.
I pronounce it Raiz.
Grays. Okay.
Those old
Right.
my college roommates used to call me that, so it just kind of stuck.
Right on. I love it, and it's good SEO. I don't see that word anywhere else, so I think you kind of got that.
Brand cuffs.
Yeah, brand cuffs, exactly. Well, Greg, thanks a lot for coming on, and talk to you in 10 years.
Hopefully less.
Hopefully less. There we go. That's true. Fair. Okay. Thanks a lot, Greg.
Thanks all.
Right on, brother.
That was fun.
Yeah. Good times. You know, baby.
What's your, what do you, where do you publish? Is it mostly iTunes or?
It's wherever podcasts are available.